In a small, quiet town that most people just passed through without noticing, there stood an old cafe on the corner of the main street. Its paint had faded years ago, and the sign above the door creaked whenever the wind blew. Inside, the smell of brewed coffee mixed with the sweet scent of pastries. Behind the counter worked a young girl who rarely spoke, but everyone who came in knew her face. They just never really saw her. She moved gently, almost soundlessly, wiping tables, serving tea, washing dishes. Her clothes were simple, and her hair was usually tied back in a loose braid. Most customers assumed she was shy, maybe even uneducated. They didn't know that behind her quiet eyes lived a world of sound and music no one else could hear. At the far corner of the cafe sat an old upright piano. Its keys were yellowed, some chipped, and the wood was scratched from years of use. Hardly anyone touched it anymore. The owner had bought it decades ago, back when live music filled the evenings. But now it was just decoration, gathering dust beside the window. Every night after the cafe closed and the last chair was turned upside down on the table, the girl would gently lift the cover of that piano. She would sit on the old bench, her fingers trembling slightly before they touched the keys. And then, silence turned into magic. The first notes were always soft, uncertain, like she was greeting an old friend. But soon the melody grew bolder. Her fingers danced across the keys, finding rhythms she had never learned from anyone. She didn't need sheet music. She played from memory, from feelings she couldn't explain. The walls of the cafe seemed to listen. The faint streetlight from outside fell on her face, and for that 1 hour every night. She wasn't the girl who cleaned tables. She was a musician. Her father had been the one who taught her those first notes. He used to play when she was little, his rough hands surprisingly gentle on the piano. They didn't have much, but music was their language. When he passed away, the house became quiet. The piano was moved to the cafe and it stayed there, too heavy to take home, too painful to sell. It became her secret link to him. Sometimes, when the rain fell outside and the cafe lights flickered, she would close her eyes and imagine him sitting beside her again. She would play the same song he loved, and it felt like time stood still. Those were the only moments she felt truly alive. During the day, though, everything was different. The world didn't see a pianist or a dreamer. They saw a simple worker who refilled cups and carried plates. People often spoke about their own lives loudly around her, about promotions, travel, expensive schools. Some even complained about the noise when she accidentally bumped into a chair. She would bow her head, whisper an apology, and keep working. She had learned early that silence was safer than words. One afternoon, a group of young musicians came into the cafe. They were dressed stylishly, laughing, carrying cases that looked like they held instruments. She served them tea, listening quietly as they talked about a big national piano competition happening in the city next month. It was the kind of event that made the news, where the best young pianists from across the country performed in front of famous judges. One of the boys said proudly that his older sister was entering. Another joked about how nervous she was, even though she'd trained for years under a top teacher. Then someone looked toward the old piano in the corner and laughed. Can you imagine playing that thing in a competition? It probably sounds like a broken toy. The others joined in, laughing loudly. The girl froze for a second, her hand still holding a tray. She looked at the piano. She knew it wasn't perfect, but it was still beautiful to her. She wanted to tell them that even broken keys can make music if you know how to listen. But she stayed quiet. No one would take her seriously anyway. That night, when the cafe was empty again, she sat at the piano and started to play that same melody she'd been working on for weeks. It was her own creation, a song about loneliness, about how the world can ignore you, but you still find strength inside yourself. She played softly at first, then louder, almost angrily. Each note was like a piece of her heart falling out. When she finished, tears rolled down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, afraid someone might see, even though she was completely alone. A few nights later, while she was playing, she didn't notice someone standing outside the cafe window. It was an older man, a regular customer who often came for tea in the mornings. He was a retired music professor who had once trained students for big orchestras. He had always noticed how carefully the girl moved, how she hummed under her breath while cleaning. That night, walking home later than usual, he heard the sound of piano music drifting through the window. It stopped him in his tracks. He stood there in the cold for almost 10 minutes, listening. The melody was so full of feeling that it made his eyes sting. He hadn't heard anything that honest in years. After a while, he quietly left, not wanting to interrupt. But he came back the next evening hoping to hear her again. And he did. Inside, the girl had no idea that anyone was listening. To her, music was still something private, something she did for herself and for her father's memory. She didn't dream of fame. She didn't even think she was good enough to play in front of anyone. All she wanted was to express the emotions she couldn't put into words. Every time she finished playing, she would close the piano lid gently and whisper a small thank you. It became her nightly ritual. Sometimes she imagined the piano answering her back, telling her to keep going, to never stop. But even though she kept her world small, fate had other plans. One morning, as she was sweeping the floor, the same old man walked in earlier than usual. He ordered his tea, then looked toward the piano. "Does anyone still play that old thing?" he asked casually. She smiled shyly and shook her head. "Not really," she said softly. "It's just for decoration now." He studied her face for a moment and said, "I thought I heard someone playing the other night. It was beautiful." She froze. Her heart started beating fast. "You must have heard something else," she whispered quickly, turning away. He didn't push her, just nodded and smiled. But she knew he knew. That night she couldn't bring herself to play. She sat there staring at the piano keys, feeling embarrassed and exposed. What if people thought she was strange? What if he told others? But the next night she sat down again. The urge was too strong, and when she played even better. Like the fear itself added emotion to every note. The old man kept coming by in the mornings. Sometimes he asked gentle questions about her father or her favorite songs. Bit by bit she opened up. She told him how her father used to play, how she never learned to read notes properly, how she just felt the music instead of following rules. The man listened carefully, nodding. He didn't laugh or look surprised. One day he said quietly, "You have a gift. Don't hide it." Those words stayed with her all day. No one had ever called what she had a gift. She thought of it as something small and personal, like a secret diary. But that night, when she played again, she realized she wanted people to feel what she felt. Maybe the world wouldn't ignore her if they heard her heart through the keys. The town outside the cafe remained the same. Quiet streets, dim lights, the same customers. But inside her, something was changing. For the first time, she started to believe that her music could mean something to someone other than herself. She didn't know yet that it would one day make history. All she knew was that deep inside, she carried something powerful, something waiting to be heard. She didn't play for attention or money or praise. She played because the music inside her refused to stay silent any longer. And in that small cafe, while the rest of the world slept, a new chapter of her life quietly began. The next few weeks passed quietly, almost unnoticed by anyone except the girl and the old music professor. Every morning he came to the cafe sipping his tea slowly, watching her move between tables, always careful and gentle with the customers. Sometimes he asked questions about music. Other times he said nothing at all, just observing. She didn't mind. It felt good to have someone truly see her, not just as the quiet girl who served tea and washed dishes, but as someone who carried something special inside. The world outside, however, remained the same. Customers came and went, paying little attention to her or the cafe. Most of them were busy with their own lives, business deals, gossip, or the latest news. Even when she hummed a tune while wiping a table, most people didn't notice. It had become a habit to ignore the quiet girl in the corner. And yet, for those few who did notice, there was something captivating about the way she moved. The way her eyes seemed to carry stories no one had asked to hear. One day, a flyer appeared on the cafe's bulletin board. It was colorful, bold, and full of excitement. The text read, "National Young Pianist Competition open to everyone." The girl didn't pay much attention at first. Competitions were for those who had trained in fancy music schools, those who had teachers and lessons and a world full of opportunities she had never dreamed of. She had never even considered herself part of that world, but something about the words tugged at her chest. "Open to everyone," she whispered softly, as if speaking to herself, almost afraid someone might hear. Later that afternoon, she found herself glancing at the old piano in the corner more than usual. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, but she didn't play. She was thinking, what if she could enter? Could someone like her, a girl from a small town who had never left, compete with others who had studied for years? The thought made her stomach twist, a mixture of fear and hope. She shook her head and went back to work. pretending the flyer hadn't caught her attention. That evening, as the cafe closed, she found herself sitting at the piano again. The familiar keys felt heavy under her fingers, but she started to play, letting her emotions guide her. She played the melody she had been working on for weeks, pouring all the uncertainty, the dreams, and the quiet longing of her heart into each note. The music filled the empty cafe, wrapping around her like a warm blanket. For a moment, she forgot about fear, about doubt, about the world outside. She was simply herself, free, alive, and unafraid. The old professor had stayed longer than usual that night. He watched silently from the corner, leaning on his cane. When she finished, she lowered her hands and looked up, surprised to see him still there. "You should enter," he said quietly, his eyes serious. "You're ready?" She blinked, confused. "Me? Enter? I don't know. I've never—" "I can't," her words faltered. She had always believed that the world would never take her seriously. Competitions were not meant for cafe girls. They were meant for the trained, the wealthy, the ones who had teachers and lessons and perfect instruments. He smiled gently, as if he had been expecting her hesitation. "Talent like yours doesn't wait for permission," he said. "It doesn't care where you come from. You have something that can't be taught, something they can't copy. You must share it." She stayed quiet for a long moment, thinking. The idea terrified her. She imagined walking into a large hall filled with judges and strangers, playing in front of people who might laugh at her, dismiss her, or say she didn't belong. But alongside the fear, there was a tiny spark of hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, she could be heard. The next morning, she looked at the flyer again. Her heart raced as she traced the words with her finger. "Open to everyone." She repeated the phrase softly, almost like a prayer. Slowly, the spark of courage grew. She made up her mind. She would enter. The days that followed were filled with preparation, though not the kind most people imagined. She didn't have a music room or a grand piano to practice on. She had the old cafe piano, and she had herself. Every night after the last customer left, she would sit at the bench and play. Hours passed as she refined her melody, experimenting with rhythms, with volume, with emotion. She played faster, slower, louder, softer, letting the music grow and change, finding the parts that truly spoke of her heart. Her fingers sometimes bled from over-practicing. Her back ached from sitting for hours, but she didn't stop. She remembered the professor's words. "Talent like yours doesn't wait for permission." Each note she played became a small act of defiance against the world that had always ignored her. Each melody was a statement. She existed, she mattered, and she could create beauty that no one could take away. The townspeople, as usual, paid little attention. Some even laughed when they noticed her practicing late at night. "She's at it again," they whispered. "Why bother? She's not going anywhere." Their words stung at first, but over time she learned to ignore them. She wasn't playing for them. She was playing for herself, for her father, for the music that had always lived inside her. One evening, the professor arrived earlier than usual. He brought an old metronome with him, a small book of music theory, and a warm smile. "You're doing well," he said, setting the metronome on the piano. "But let's work on control. You have the power, but you need to channel it." She listened carefully as he guided her, showing small adjustments in hand placement, posture, and timing. She absorbed everything, but she also added her own touch, refusing to lose the uniqueness of her music. She was learning, yes, but she was also staying true to herself. After weeks of practice, the day of the first competition round approached. She had never seen such a place. A large hall filled with polished grand pianos, with walls of gleaming wood and lights that seemed brighter than the sun. She walked in slowly, her hands clammy, her heart racing. Young pianists from cities she had only read about in newspapers were already there, warming up, speaking with confidence, laughing with friends. Their attire was formal, their expressions polished. She felt out of place immediately. She adjusted the sleeves of her simple dress and took a deep breath. She told herself she belonged there just as much as anyone else. She had her music. She had her heart. And she had a story that no one else could play. When it was her turn, the hall fell silent. The judges looked at her skeptically at first, as if to say, "Who is this girl?" She smiled faintly, nervously, and approached the piano. She sat down, her fingers hovering over the keys for a moment. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but they quickly grew in confidence and strength. Every movement, every melody told a story. She wasn't just playing notes. She was speaking from her soul. She played the music of her small town, of the quiet nights in the cafe, of her father's memory, of every moment she had ever felt ignored or unseen. The hall seemed to disappear around her. There was only her and the piano, and the music that flowed between them. Some judges leaned forward, surprised by the depth of feeling. Some whispered to each other. The other competitors stopped practicing, listening, captivated. By the time she finished, there was a long pause, almost as if the hall itself was catching its breath. Then slowly the first clap sounded. One judge, unable to contain himself, stood up. Others followed. Some even had tears in their eyes. She looked up, stunned. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She expected nods of polite recognition, maybe a polite smile or the sound of polite applause. Not this, not standing ovations. Not the sudden realization that everyone who had ever doubted her might now be seeing her for the first time. The professor, sitting quietly at the back, smiled with pride. He had always known she could do it. He had seen the hours of dedication, the quiet struggle, the raw talent that no one else had noticed. And now the world, for the first time, was beginning to notice too. When she left the stage, a small group of people came to speak with her. They wanted to know her story, her inspirations, her name. For a moment, the quiet girl from the cafe became the center of attention. She smiled softly, feeling both nervous and exhilarated. She didn't fully understand it yet, but she knew one thing. She had stepped out of the shadows, and the world was finally listening. Even as she walked out of the hall, she thought of the old cafe, the dusty piano, and the nights spent playing alone. She realized that those moments had led her here. They had shaped her music, her courage, and her story, and she knew that this was only the beginning. The unnoticed talent had finally been seen, and she would never be invisible again. The days after the competition passed in a strange haze for the girl. People spoke to her differently now. In the cafe, some customers who had once ignored her paused, glancing at her with a mix of curiosity and respect. A few even tried to make small talk, though awkwardly. She smiled politely, but her mind was elsewhere. The applause, the surprise, the realization that she had been seen, it all lingered in her chest like a song she couldn't stop humming. Despite the newfound attention, life in the town continued as usual. The streets remained quiet in the evenings. The shopkeepers went about their routines, and the cafe still smelled of coffee and pastries. But something had shifted. For the first time, she felt like there was a place in the wider world where her music could belong. She didn't know how far it could take her, but she knew she wanted to find out. One chilly morning, as she was stacking cups behind the counter, a tall man walked into the cafe. His hair was silver at the temples, his coat worn but neat, and he carried himself with the calm confidence of someone who had lived a long life full of experience. He didn't order coffee right away. Instead, he looked around the room, his eyes pausing on the piano in the corner. Then, as if realizing something, he smiled softly. "You play that piano, don't you?" he asked, his voice gentle, almost like he didn't want to startle her. She froze, a rag in her hands. I mean, sometimes," she said quietly. He nodded as though her answer had been expected. "I heard you at the competition. Your music, it stayed with me." Her heart skipped a beat. He had come here after the competition, after she had played in front of all those judges, just to hear her again. She blinked, unsure how to respond. "I'm a retired music professor," he continued. "I've heard many students in my life. Few leave an impression like yours. You have something rare." The words made her chest tighten. Rare. She had never been called rare before. Most people didn't even notice her at all. The man's gaze held no judgment, only genuine curiosity and admiration. He spent the morning talking with her about music, but not in the way teachers usually spoke. He didn't list rules or techniques at first. Instead, he asked her about her inspiration, her father, and the small songs she had made up in the quiet of the cafe. She told him about the nights she spent playing alone, about how the keys sometimes felt like old friends, about how she imagined her father sitting beside her, nodding at every note. He listened carefully, nodding, asking questions that made her think in ways she hadn't before. When she played one of her melodies for him, he closed his eyes and let the notes wash over him. Then he opened them and smiled. "You're ready for something bigger," he said quietly. "But you need guidance. Someone to help shape your talent without changing the music that is uniquely yours. She didn't know what to say. Guidance. The word felt both exciting and terrifying. Could someone teach her, really guide her without taking away what made her music hers? And yet there was a spark of hope she couldn't ignore. He continued, "There's a chance for you to perform in front of an even larger audience, one that could truly change your life. But it won't be easy. You will face people who doubt you, who expect you to fail. It's part of the journey, but I believe you can rise above it." The girl looked down at her hands, remembering the nights she had spent alone at the piano, the long hours, the blisters, the aches. All of it had led to this moment. She realized slowly that perhaps she was ready to step beyond the small town, beyond the cafe, beyond the people who had never noticed her. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. The man shook his head gently. "You can. You already have in ways you might not even recognize. I've seen your music touch people. That is proof enough. Now you must learn to trust yourself." Over the next few weeks, the professor returned every morning. Sometimes he brought small exercises to strengthen her hands. Sometimes he showed her techniques to bring out subtle expressions in her music. But mostly he listened. He let her play freely, occasionally offering suggestions, always careful not to take away the emotion in her melodies. She learned faster than she ever imagined, not because she was naturally gifted alone, but because she loved every moment of it. Each practice session was a conversation, between her fingers and the keys, between the notes and the feelings behind them. Sometimes she laughed, sometimes she cried. Sometimes she simply sat in silence afterward, letting the music settle in her heart. One day, the professor said, "There is a venue in the city, a place where you can perform for people who have never heard your story. I want you to play there, not for trophies, not for praise, but so the world can feel what you feel." The idea terrified her. The city was enormous compared to the quiet streets of her town. The audience would be strangers, important people, critics, people who could either lift her up or break her. But underneath the fear, a quiet thrill grew. This was the first real chance to share her gift beyond the cafe, beyond the competition. She spent hours thinking about it, imagining herself sitting at a grand piano under bright lights, strangers watching her every movement. Her hands shook at the thought, but her heart raced with excitement. Finally, she nodded. "I'll do it," she said softly. The professor smiled. "Good. We start preparing tomorrow." Preparation became their daily routine. She would practice for hours, refining melodies she had once only played for herself. He taught her ways to hold her posture, to control the dynamics of each note, to pace her breathing so that every phrase of music could be expressed fully. Sometimes it felt exhausting, almost impossible, but she never gave up. Every evening she returned to the cafe piano to play, letting the music flow freely, to remind herself why she had started in the first place. Her confidence grew slowly. She began to believe that her music could move people, that her small, quiet life had given her something extraordinary. Even the townspeople who had once ignored her began to notice the change. They whispered among themselves, asking if she was preparing for a big performance. Some were skeptical, some curious, but most didn't fully understand. That didn't matter. She was doing this for herself and for the music that had always lived in her heart. Finally, the day arrived for her first real chance to perform outside the competition. The professor accompanied her to the city. She had never seen so many people, so many lights, so much noise. It was overwhelming, and for a moment she considered turning back, returning to the safety of her quiet town. But then she felt the familiar pull of the piano, the memory of nights spent playing in the cafe, and she knew she could not turn away. The venue was impressive. The stage was large, the grand piano polished to a shine, the seats filled with people who had come to hear music from performers they had heard of or read about. She sat at the piano and took a deep breath, feeling her fingers hover above the keys. She closed her eyes, imagining the cafe, the dusty corner, the quiet nights when she had first played, and then she began. The first notes were soft, delicate, almost hesitant, but as she played, she allowed the music to take over. Her fingers moved with precision, but more importantly, with emotion. Every melody carried the story of her life, the loneliness, the hope, the quiet determination to be seen and heard. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the depth of feeling in her music. She didn't notice the people in the seats, the flash of cameras, or the whispers of surprise. She only noticed the music, the way it flowed through her, through the piano and into the hearts of everyone listening. Each note seemed to carry a message: I am here, I exist. I have something to give. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then applause erupted, louder and more heartfelt than anything she had ever experienced. People stood, some with tears in their eyes, others with smiles of pure admiration. She had not just played notes, she had shared her soul. The professor, sitting in the back, gave a small nod of approval. He had known all along that she was capable of this, but seeing her perform on such a stage and seeing the audience respond so deeply was a moment of pride he would never forget. As the crowd clapped, she realized something. This was not the end of her journey, nor was it just a single performance. This was a turning point. The world had begun to notice her, and she had finally found the courage to step into the space she had always belonged in, even if she hadn't known it before. That night, as they left the city, she felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She thought about the cafe, the dusty piano, the quiet nights when she had played alone, and she smiled. Those moments had given her the courage to face a much larger stage. And she knew deep inside that this was only the beginning. She had taken her first step into a larger world, and the music that had always lived inside her was ready to lead the way. The days after her first city performance were filled with a strange mixture of excitement and worry. The applause, the smiles, the admiration from strangers, it all lingered in her mind. Yet the world outside that one magical evening seemed indifferent once again. Life in the small town went on as if nothing had changed. People greeted her politely. Some whispered about her recent performance, but most were still too busy with their own lives to truly notice. She found herself walking the quiet streets, replaying the notes of her music in her head. Each sound felt different now, heavier somehow, like it carried more meaning than before. She realized that the moment she had stepped onto a larger stage, her music had become more than just a personal escape. It had turned into something others expected her to perform, to perfect, to share. And with that realization came a weight she had never felt before. Her professor noticed it immediately. During one of their morning sessions at the cafe, he watched her hesitate over the piano keys, her fingers twitching nervously. "You're thinking too much," he said gently. "You're trying to play for everyone else, not for yourself." She shook her head, frustrated. "I don't know how not to. Everyone expects me to be perfect now. What if I fail? What if they hear me and realize I'm just a girl from a cafe?" He nodded slowly, understanding. Fear is part of the journey. Everyone feels it. Even the most accomplished musicians. The question is not whether you feel afraid, but whether you let it stop you. You can't control what others expect, but you can control what you give from your heart. She sighed, running her fingers over the familiar keys. She had always thought of the piano as a friend, a place where she could be herself without judgment. But now it felt like a test, a mirror reflecting the expectations of everyone who had watched her perform. She loved music more than anything, yet she found herself questioning whether she was truly ready for what lay ahead. In the days that followed, the professor introduced more structured practice sessions. They worked on technical skills, hand coordination, timing, and control over dynamics. Every morning she would arrive early, sometimes feeling exhausted before she even touched the keys. Some exercises were frustratingly difficult. Her hands cramped, her arms ached, and sometimes she would hit a wrong note and feel a pang of despair. "I can't do this," she whispered one evening, her fingers hovering over the piano. "I'm not ready. I'll never be ready." The professor knelt beside her, placing a hand gently over hers. "You are ready," he said softly. "You have always been ready. But talent alone is not enough. Discipline, patience, and courage are what turn talent into something others can see. Every mistake, every struggle, it all shapes you. Don't run from it. Face it." Slowly, she began to understand. Each difficult exercise, each long hour at the piano was not a punishment. It was preparation. It was a way to take the music that had once lived only in her heart and make it reach the hearts of others. And yet, despite this understanding, the fear did not completely vanish. It lingered, like a shadow following her wherever she went. Outside the cafe, people started talking more about her upcoming performances. Some were supportive, offering kind words or small gestures of encouragement. Others were skeptical, questioning whether a girl from a small town who had never studied in a formal music school could truly compete with the best pianists in the country. Their doubts and whispers reached her ears, sometimes slipping into her mind when she least expected it. She tried to ignore them, but the thoughts crept in anyway. What if she wasn't as good as they thought? What if all the applause had been a fluke? Her heart pounded at night as she imagined walking onto a grand stage and making a mistake, letting everyone see that she was ordinary, just like they had always assumed. The professor noticed the change in her demeanor. One evening, as they were finishing a long session, he spoke gently. "You are putting too much pressure on yourself. Remember why you started? Not for recognition, not for applause, but for the music itself. The moment you forget that, you start playing for everyone else, and that is when fear takes over." She closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. She thought of the nights spent alone in the cafe, the quiet melodies she had created in secret, the moments when the piano had been her only companion. The fear was still there, but she began to see that it was a natural part of the process, not a sign that she had failed. In the following weeks, preparation became a delicate balance between discipline and self-discovery. She practiced scales, arpeggios, and complex passages that challenged her in ways she had never imagined. Sometimes she wanted to give up, but then she remembered the professor's words, and the spark of determination in her chest refused to fade. Her routine changed. She rose earlier, spending hours at the piano before the cafe opened. She practiced during breaks, played quietly after closing, and often stayed late into the night perfecting her melodies. Each session brought small victories. A passage played flawlessly, a rhythm finally mastered, a note held with the right emotion. Each victory reminded her why she loved music so deeply. But the struggle wasn't only physical. Her mind was her biggest challenge. She battled self-doubt constantly, questioning whether she was worthy of the opportunities she had been given. Sometimes she would replay past performances in her head, imagining every mistake, every imperfection. She worried that when she stepped onto a bigger stage, the world would see her as she feared she truly was. Ordinary, unnoticed, unworthy. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly exhausting session, she sat at the piano staring at the keys, her shoulders slumped. "Why am I doing this?" she whispered. "Why do I keep trying?" The professor came and sat beside her, not saying anything at first. He simply listened to her frustration, understanding that sometimes words were not enough. Then he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Because this is who you are. You can try to ignore it, hide it, or doubt it, but music is part of you. It has always been part of you. And the world needs to hear it. That is why you keep going." She let his words sink in. Slowly, a small sense of calm returned. She realized that the struggle, the fear, the doubt, all of it was part of the path she had chosen. It was not a punishment, but a test of her courage, resilience, and dedication. As the day of the next major performance approached, she felt both nervous and prepared. She had worked tirelessly, faced her fears, and discovered depths of strength she had never known existed. Yet the thought of stepping onto a stage in front of hundreds of strangers still made her stomach twist. On the morning of the performance, she arrived at the venue early. The hall was vast and intimidating, with rows of polished seats, bright lights, and the kind of grandeur that made small-town life feel like a distant memory. She walked slowly, letting her eyes take in the stage, the grand piano waiting in the center, the microphones, the spotlights. Her hands trembled, but she reminded herself that she had been here before. She had played in front of strangers, and she had survived. She could do it again. Backstage, other performers were warming up, their expressions confident, practiced, and polished. Some glanced at her curiously, noting the simplicity of her dress, the quiet way she moved. She felt their eyes like a weight on her shoulders, but she held her head high, reminding herself that their doubt did not define her. When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage slowly, feeling the eyes of the audience settle on her. She sat at the piano, her fingers hovering above the keys. For a moment, everything felt overwhelming. The lights, the space, the crowd. But then she remembered the quiet nights in the cafe, the melodies that had grown from her heart, the long hours of practice with her professor. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let the music flow. The first notes were hesitant, soft, like a gentle conversation. Then they grew stronger, bolder, filled with emotion and life. Every passage told a story, of struggle, of hope, of the quiet determination to rise above fear and doubt. The audience was captivated, leaning forward, drawn into the world she had created with her music. For the first time, she felt completely in control of her fear. Each note, each chord, each pause was deliberate, infused with the lessons she had learned during her struggle. She realized that the stage, the audience, the lights, they were not obstacles. They were part of the music itself, part of the journey she had been preparing for all along. When the final note faded into silence, the hall erupted in applause. She looked up, her heart pounding, and saw people standing, some with tears in their eyes, some smiling broadly. The fear that had weighed on her for weeks dissolved, replaced by a profound sense of accomplishment and joy. She had faced the struggle, embraced it, and transformed it into something beautiful. Backstage, the professor greeted her with a quiet nod and a small smile. "You did it," he said simply. "Every struggle, every doubt, you turned it into music. That is what matters." She smiled back, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She realized that the journey was far from over. There would be more performances, more challenges, more moments of fear. But she also knew that she had grown stronger, braver, and more determined than ever. As she left the hall that evening, walking through the quiet city streets, she thought about the cafe, the dusty piano, the nights spent playing alone in the small town that had shaped her, Xi'an. The day of the biggest performance of her life arrived with a strange mix of excitement, fear, and anticipation. She had practiced for weeks under the guidance of her professor, refining every melody, every note, every pause. Still, as she looked out the window at the streets bustling with people, her heart beat faster than ever. The city seemed alive in a way her small town never had been, full of sounds and movement and possibilities. And soon she would be a part of it, even if just for a moment. When she arrived at the concert hall, she felt her nerves rise again. It was enormous, more than she had ever imagined. The walls were lined with polished wood that gleamed under bright lights, and the seats stretched back farther than she could see. People moved about, adjusting microphones, arranging chairs, and tuning instruments. Musicians she had only heard of in stories were rehearsing nearby, their confidence and skill evident in every movement. She felt small, almost insignificant. Her professor, ever calm and steady, took her hand for a brief moment. "Remember why you are here," he said softly. "You are not here to prove anything to anyone. You are here to share your music, your story, your heart. Let it speak for you." She nodded, taking a deep breath. She thought of the dusty piano in the corner of her cafe, of the quiet nights when she had played alone, and of the melodies she had created from the depths of her soul. She felt a spark of courage flicker inside her. She could do this. She had to do this. Backstage, the other performers were preparing as well. They were polished, confident, some whispering among themselves, some giving quick warm-ups. A few glanced at her curiously, noting the simplicity of her dress and the way she seemed quiet and withdrawn. She felt their eyes, but she refused to let them shake her. She closed her eyes and imagined the cafe, the piano, her father, and all the nights she had spent pouring her heart into the music no one had heard. That was her strength. That was her story. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage slowly. The lights were bright and the audience's eyes were fixed on her. Hundreds of people, strangers, critics, music lovers, all waiting for the first note. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the grand piano, its polished surface gleaming under the spotlight. She sat down, took a deep breath, and let her fingers hover above the keys. The hall fell silent as she began to play. The first notes were soft, delicate, almost hesitant, as if testing the space, feeling for the right resonance. But then, gradually, her confidence grew. She allowed the music to flow freely, letting her emotions guide each movement of her fingers. Every chord, every melody, every subtle shift in rhythm was a part of her story. The struggle, the hope, the quiet determination that had carried her this far. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the raw emotion in her music. This was not just technical skill or practice technique. This was something deeper, something impossible to teach. It was the honesty of her life, the passion of her heart, the years spent unnoticed and unappreciated, finally expressed in a way that everyone could feel. Some of the judges, initially skeptical, exchanged glances. They had seen countless performances by trained pianists, but there was something in her music that went beyond training. It was personal, intimate, alive. Even the musicians waiting backstage stopped, listening quietly, mesmerized by the depth of feeling she conveyed. She played for what felt like hours, though it was only a fraction of the performance. Every note carried meaning, Every pause allowed the emotion to breathe. She didn't think about the audience, the applause, or the critics. She played for herself, for her father, for the countless nights she had spent in solitude, and for the music that had always lived inside her. By the time she reached the final section, the music had grown in intensity. Her fingers flew over the keys with precision and grace, but each note was still full of life, full of emotion. She could feel the audience leaning in, holding their breath, caught in the spell of her music. The hall was alive, but it was not the lights or the grandeur that held it. It was her music, and the story she had poured into it. As the last note faded, there was a moment of silence. Time seemed to pause. She sat there, hands hovering above the keys, waiting, unsure if the spell would break. Then slowly a single clap rang out. Another followed. And then the hall erupted in thunderous applause. People stood cheering, some with tears in their eyes, some smiling broadly. The sound was overwhelming, and for the first time in her life, she truly understood the power of music to connect people, to touch hearts, to transcend words. She looked up and saw the professor standing at the back of the hall, a quiet smile on his face, his eyes glimmering with pride. He had believed in her from the beginning, had guided her, and had never doubted her talent. And now, seeing the world respond to her music, he knew that all the struggles, all the doubt, and all the fear had been worth it. After the performance, people approached her eagerly. Some wanted to know her story, others wanted to hear her play again, and a few asked if she would teach or perform elsewhere. She smiled softly, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had never imagined this moment, never believed she could reach so many people, never dreamed that her music could make such a profound impact. But amidst the excitement, she felt something even more important. She realized that the applause, the praise, and the recognition were not what mattered most. What mattered was that she had shared her story, her heart, and her life through her music. She had taken the fear, the doubt, and the struggle and transformed them into something beautiful, something lasting, something that others could feel deep within themselves. As she left the hall that evening, walking through the quiet streets of the city, she felt a sense of calm she had never known. The world had finally heard her, and in that moment she understood the true power of music. It was not just notes on a page, or fingers moving over keys. It was an expression of the soul, a bridge between hearts, a language that needed no translation. The professor walked beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "You have done something extraordinary," he said softly, "not because of the applause or recognition, but because of the honesty in your music. That is what will stay with people long after the performance ends." She nodded, thinking of the dusty piano in the cafe, of the quiet nights spent playing alone, of the small town that had shaped her. She realized that those moments had prepared her for this performance, that every struggle, every hour of practice, every doubt had led her here. She had not just played music, she had told a story, her story, and the world had listened. In the days that followed, news of her performance spread quickly. Articles were written, videos were shared, and people across the city and beyond wanted to know more about the girl from the small town who had captivated the hearts of everyone in the hall. Invitations arrived to perform in other cities, in larger venues, on stages she had only dreamed of. Critics praised her emotion, her originality, and her ability to connect with an audience in a way that was rare and profound. Yet, despite all the attention, she remained humble. She returned to the cafe, sitting at the old piano in the corner, playing softly for herself. She smiled as she thought about how far she had come, but she also remembered why she had started. Music had always been her way to speak when words failed, her way to honor her father, and her way to find meaning in a world that had often ignored her. The applause, the recognition, the invitations, they were all wonderful, but they were not the reason she played. She played because she had a story to tell, because she had a voice that needed to be heard, and because she had discovered the strength within herself to rise above fear and doubt. And so, sitting at the piano in the quiet corner of the cafe, she began to play once more. The notes flowed freely, filled with emotion, memory, and hope. Each melody carried a message of resilience, courage, and the power of dreams. She knew that her journey was far from over, that there would be more challenges, more stages, more moments of fear. But she also knew that she had found her place, her voice, and her music. The performance had changed everything, not just for the audience, but for her as well. She had discovered the true meaning of her gift, the depth of her talent, and the power of perseverance. And as the music filled the room, she felt a quiet certainty settle in her heart. The world would never ignore her again, and she would continue to play, to share and to inspire wherever her music took her. After the performance that had changed her life, the girl returned to the cafe in her small town. It felt different now. The familiar walls, the smell of coffee and pastries, the old upright piano in the corner. It all seemed more alive, more meaningful. She had traveled to the city, performed on a grand stage, and touched the hearts of hundreds, yet the quiet cafe remained her true home, the place where her music had first been born. In the days following the performance, invitations arrived for her to play in other cities. In grand concert halls she had never imagined. She could have left immediately, stepping into a life of fame and recognition. But she paused. She thought of the cafe, the dusty piano, and the nights she had spent playing alone. She realized that while the world could celebrate her music, her heart still belonged to the place that had shaped her. She continued to practice daily, guided by the same dedication that had carried her from the first hesitant notes to the standing ovations. Each time her fingers touched the keys, she remembered her father and the quiet inspiration he had given her. Every note she played became a conversation with him, a tribute to the years they had shared, and a celebration of the strength she had discovered within herself. Her professor remained a steady presence in her life, supporting her, advising her, and sometimes simply listening. He encouraged her to explore new melodies, to experiment with rhythms, and to push the boundaries of her talent. Yet he also reminded her to stay true to the music that was uniquely hers. "Fame can be fleeting," he said one evening, "but honesty in music lasts forever." She held on to that wisdom, letting it guide every decision she made. The people of her town began to see her differently. Those who had once ignored her now stopped to greet her warmly, asking about her performances and expressing admiration. Yet she treated everyone with the same quiet humility she had always carried. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible, and she never wanted anyone to feel that way in her presence. She spoke kindly, listened carefully, and shared her music freely, understanding that true recognition was not about applause alone, it was about connection. One evening, she decided to hold a small concert in the cafe. She wanted to share her music with the place that had been her refuge for so long. Word spread quietly, and a small crowd gathered, curious to hear the girl who had captivated the city. She sat at the old piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The music filled the cafe, more powerful than it had ever been. It was not just technical skill or mastery of notes. It was the story of her life, the journey from being unnoticed to being celebrated, the courage to face fear and doubt, and the discovery of her own strength. People listened in awe, some with tears in their eyes, some smiling with wonder. They had not just heard music. They had experienced it, felt it in their hearts, and understood the power of someone who refused to remain invisible. After the performance, a small child approached her, shyly holding a notebook filled with drawings of pianos and music notes. "I want to play like you someday," the child whispered. She knelt down and smiled, feeling a warmth she had never known before. "You will," she said softly. "You just have to keep playing even when no one is watching. That is how music grows." In that moment, she understood something important. Her journey was not just about her. It was about inspiring others, about showing that talent and dedication could break through even the most invisible circumstances. She realized that her music could become a bridge, connecting people, sparking dreams, and giving hope. Months passed, and her reputation continued to grow. Invitations came from music schools, concert halls, and even international events. She performed in cities she had only dreamed of, and with each performance, she shared the story of the girl who had once been ignored, the girl who had sat alone at a dusty piano, and the music that had been her voice when words failed. Despite all the recognition, she remained humble and grounded. She never forgot the quiet nights in the cafe, the long hours of practice, the doubts and fears that had once threatened to overwhelm her. Those memories became a foundation, reminding her that her success was not just about talent, it was about perseverance, courage, and staying true to herself. She began to teach music to children in her town, offering lessons in the same cafe where she had once played alone. She encouraged them to explore their own melodies, to express themselves freely, and to never be afraid of being unseen. She shared stories of her struggles, her failures, and her triumphs, helping them understand that every journey began with small steps. quiet dedication and belief in oneself. Her influence grew quietly but steadily. Parents who had once doubted the value of music in a small town now encouraged their children to pursue it. Local musicians found inspiration in her story, and even those who had initially dismissed her talent began to recognize the importance of nurturing passion and dedication. She became more than a performer. She became a symbol of hope, courage, and the power of unseen talent. One evening, after a long day of lessons and practice, she sat at the piano in the cafe alone. The room was quiet, lit only by the warm glow of lamps. She closed her eyes and let her fingers dance over the keys, playing a melody that combined everything she had learned, felt, and experienced. Each note carried memories, emotions, and lessons. It was a reflection of her journey, a song of resilience, growth, and discovery. As she played, she thought about the people who had once ignored her, the doubts she had faced, and the fear that had once seemed impossible to overcome. She realized that those challenges had shaped her music, had given it depth, and had prepared her to touch the hearts of others. She understood that her story, her journey, and her music were inseparable, each note carrying the essence of who she had become. In that moment, she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment she had never known. She had faced the world, confronted her fears, and discovered the true power of her music. She had transformed struggle into beauty, doubt into determination, and silence into a voice that resonated far beyond the walls of her small cafe. The cafe itself seemed to respond to her music, the old piano singing with renewed energy, as if celebrating the journey it had witnessed. She smiled softly, knowing that every note, every melody, and every performance had been a part of something larger, a story that would continue to inspire, uplift, and touch lives. As the years passed, her music became a legacy. She continued to perform in cities and countries far beyond her small town, but she always returned to the cafe, the place where it had all begun. Her story inspired countless young musicians, showing them that talent could be hidden in the most unlikely places and that perseverance, courage, and authenticity could transform lives. She never sought fame for its own sake. Recognition was a byproduct of her dedication, not the goal. Her true purpose had always been to share her music, to connect with others, and to prove that even those who were once ignored could leave a lasting mark on the world. In the quiet moments, when she sat alone at the piano, she thought of her father and the inspiration he had given her. She felt his presence in every note, in every melody, and in every moment of courage. His lessons, his encouragement, and his love had never left her. They were woven into the music itself, a guiding force that had shaped her journey. Through it all, she remained the same girl who had once been unnoticed, who had spent countless nights playing alone at a small cafe piano, but now her music had a voice that reached far beyond those walls. She had discovered her strength, shared her story, and left a mark on the world that could never be erased. And so, sitting at the piano, surrounded by the familiar warmth of the cafe, she played once more. The notes flowed freely, carrying the story of her life, the struggles, the victories, the lessons, and the hope. Each melody was a testament to perseverance, courage, and the power of a single person to rise above invisibility and create something beautiful. Her music became a gift, not just for herself but for everyone who heard it. It reminded people that even in the quietest corners and the simplest places, extraordinary talent could exist. It showed them that dreams, no matter how unlikely, could be realized with dedication, courage, and heart. As the final notes of her melody faded into the warm evening air, she sat quietly, feeling a profound sense of peace. She had come far from the girl who once went unnoticed, yet she remained humble, grounded, and deeply connected to the roots of her journey. She had played, she had inspired, and she had left a legacy that would endure far beyond her lifetime. The world had finally heard her. She had finally been seen, and through her music she would continue to touch hearts, inspire dreams, and remind everyone that even those once ignored could make history.